Welcome to the Strength and Mobility Podcast with Flow Motion Fitness.
All right.
Right on.
Should we start with a question?
Yeah. Okay. Let's start off with a question, and then I suppose we'll just flow better.
Yeah.
From
we
there.
had a bunch of questions ages ago. Remember?
Yeah.
What happened to those?
What questions?
We actually wrote down loads.
Oh, okay. I've got quite a few written here.
Okay,
Anyway,
we'll start
because
with
I've been watching your stories, Gabe, on Instagram. I've been like, okay, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Okay, Nicole will be right back, by the way.
No worries. So yeah, the topic is the topic you were discussing in your stories, literally yesterday, about integrated and isolated exercise.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And to begin with, I know you answered it in your stories, but to set the way, we could start by saying what the key differences are between isolated and integrated exercises.
Sure. Yeah, when it comes to like the isolated versus integrated, whenever I hear the word isolated, I just like to think of like a single joint and being able to really control that single joint, to control it well. And our joints typically, like you think about the ones that really need mobility, like on either end of our torso, we have ball and socket joints. So we have our shoulder, we have our hip, and because they're ball and socket joints, they can move a ton of different ways. So if you learn to master them in isolation, knowing that you can do flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, circumduction, all that, then you really begin to understand what that joint is capable of in an isolated fashion. But the way life works is that we kind of move as one big coordinated functional unit. So eventually we need to be able to reintegrate that back into a more coordinated fashion, which is going to involve like a multi-joint coordinated movement. But there's advantages to each, right? Like when you think about mobility work, a lot of times our mobility work is isolated because, let's say you experience an injury, you have an ache or a pain, there's a good chance there's some sort of movement dysfunction that's contributing to it. So starting somebody off with a ton of movement complexity is probably not like the best place to start if they don't understand that, like, hey, you can move your scapula just by itself a bunch of different directions, right? Yeah. But over time, like once they understand that, then you can begin to progress complexity, get into more integrated movement patterns where they're swinging something around their head. You probably noticed that I swing a lot of maces and kettlebells over my head, but that takes some scapular coordination. So starting there might not be the right place. So kind of a long-winded explanation, but I feel like it's necessary because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah,
I think
so. I suppose beginners, actually, when it comes to scapular movement, most of them have never tried it before.
Yeah.
Like if I'm working with a beginner, usually they've not tried scapular isolation exercises and they're not very good at specific types of scapular control. So if you were to ask them to do, say, like, is it called a gamma cast or like a halo?
Yep.
Not going to happen. Like they can't do it, or it causes them pain.
Yep.
So there's that.
Yeah. So what are your? Oh, sorry. I was going to say, what do you think about machines then that work in isolation? Because I know in the fitness industry, there's a lot of people that hate machines, like they're unfunctional. So machines that isolate body parts, do they have a place in your program?
Yeah, well, I think that everything has like a time and a place to some degree. Like personally, I would prefer to see somebody perform an isolation exercise without the machine because there's going to be some more stabilizers involved. But in the case of like an extreme, like a really extreme scenario, like it probably has a place in a rehabilitation setting. And I myself have actually been in that place, like injury wise, where I've had to do some things where like stabilizers, like is like, nope, I need something that's going to control this for me until I can, get my feet back underneath me, so to speak. But I've also had like every injury under the sun. So, and like various degrees as well. And which is actually what like kind of led to the whole mobility thing. But for most people, I would say that they could get away with just doing movements without the machines and save themselves the cost, of what a machine is if they're looking to purchase a machine or the cost of a membership, even just being able to do it at home.
So do you think it's a better way to think of like isolation exercises is joint functions or isolating specific muscles? Because whenever you look at machines in the gym, they isolate specific muscles. Do you think it would be cool if there was a machine that isolated like a specific joint function, for example, like hip internal rotation or hip external rotation.
Yeah, well, I think that'd be great, because ultimately, like joint function is kind of the name of the game when it comes to the mobility work that all of us do. It's like, if we can get a joint to function the way it's meant to, meaning that there's like no restrictions, or there's not these crazy imbalances going on across the joint via muscular dysfunction, then we have a joint that works well and the pain goes away. And we see that time and time again with clients. I know, like, you know, I constantly see it in your guys' stories. There's always clients that are saying, oh my gosh, I did this for the first time pain-free. And it's because the joint's functioning like it's supposed to. But I think it'd be super cool if you could see that. I think it'd be more beneficial, because I do believe that a lot of machines kind of came about in the time frame when bodybuilding was like king, you know, in the fitness industry.
That's what made it popular, yeah, for sure.
Right. So definitely it's more about like the pump than about the joint function. And yeah, so it really comes down to that. But I'd prefer to see something along those lines. And I think that's why I like something like a cable machine if someone is going to use one, because there's so much play in a cable machine. You could do some interesting, like I could do some interesting work with my scapula, you know, moving it all directions while hanging on to the end of the handle, doing something like that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
The cool thing about a machine is it really does help you isolate, doesn't it? Because when you try to get someone to isolate, for example, when we tried to do like shoulder flexion isolation exercise, like pails and rails or something, people compensate quite often through, like, say, their upper back or their lower back. They'll be like lifting up and getting like a fake shoulder flexion. So I suppose like a machine in that sense kind of cuts out compensation from other muscles, doesn't it? Because it's designed to stop it, to only isolate.
It is. And that's what's interesting about machines. Usually when you look at them, there's somewhere for you to line up a joint with the axis of rotation. And it's like, it's designed that way, like to specifically like line up a joint with an axis of rotation to set you up for that ideal position. So as long as you're aware of kind of like how to set yourself up within a machine, then you can utilize it it's like to get the most benefit. But in the same breath, if you don't understand how to set yourself up in the machine properly, you could contribute further to the dysfunction. So it really just comes down to like the knowledge of the user. If the person using it understands how they're supposed to set themselves up within it, then yeah, they could get pretty big bang for their buck. If there's someone who's pretty banged up and is having a hard time doing isolation without something guiding them. But if they're not really sure how to set themselves up in the machine, I've seen some funky uses for some machines over the years, personal training, where I just go like, what the fuck? You know? So I think all of us have, we're all giggling. We've all seen the videos, you know?
I've seen,
I mean, the internet.
I'd say actually in the gym, there'd be over 50% of users of the gym that would be using kit in a questionable manner. Like I'm very like lat pull down machine. Very rarely do you see anybody
going up and down.
No, yeah, I saw a video of that. But as in like the amount of times it's basically like a rib flare exercise. People will be trying to lat pull down their ribs. Or
that's true.
There'll be that. Then a few other exercises, like machines that would just be very questionable.
Well, I suppose that comes back to something you said on Instagram, Gabe, was that life is us moving our body as one functional unit. So do you think that the reason we're seeing so much pain in the general population is because that people are incapable of doing it in isolation? They don't have control over isolated movements, and then they're trying to put it together in sport or in exercise, and then they're compensating.
That's exactly what I think. And that's why I set up programming the way that I do, because it was like I was saying previously, you know, if you can't control your scapula, if we're going to stick with the scapula example, if you can't control that by itself, then how in the world are you going to do something like, you know, I work on tugboats. Sometimes I throw lines up on top of a ship. Like, how in the world am I going to like coordinate like hip rotation and hip extension and rotating through my torso and like also like whipping my arm up to get this line up to it? There's a lot more going on than just learning to control your scapula, right? And I think I mean that I believe that to be 100% true, that if somebody can't control their joints in isolation, there's no way they're going to be able to move their body as one functional unit. And I believe that is like the root cause of dysfunction for so many. I mean, that really is. I mean, the other small percentage of people is because they had a significant injury of some kind. But yeah, a lot of it is just self-induced.
Yeah, there's that saying that you can't move what you can't move. And it sounds obvious, but it's like, well,
you can't do shoulder things with a shoulder that doesn't function as a shoulder, for example, and you can't do hip things with a hip that doesn't function as a hip. Like,
someone the other day asked me, like, how do you do that Cossack squat to the ground and back up? Like, what do you need to strengthen, your quads or your glutes? I was like, neither. Like, it's not really about the strength element. It's a lot about the, you need ankle dorsiflexion, you need knee flexion, you need hip rotation. And they're like, okay, I'll work on that. I was like, that's going to take some months. They're like, oh, I thought I'd get it in a week. I was like, I don't think so. Highly unlikely to achieve joint functions in a week. And that's actually another topic that I would like to discuss, is how long it takes to improve joint function versus how long it takes to start feeling your bicep when you first start lifting. Like, obviously, when you first start lifting in a week, you're going to feel DOMs, you're going to feel your muscles aching pretty quickly. Within weeks, you'll be like, oh yeah, I could really feel something happening. With joint exercises, you might feel DOMs in strange places, but like the actual angle of what you're able to control isn't going to dramatically increase in a week.
No.
So it's a much longer process.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think it kind of comes into like connective tissue, and adaptation versus like muscular adaptation versus neuromuscular adaptation, which like you start getting into all these, different subcategories and where they take place. And it all takes time. I mean, initially strength gains that people are seeing up front is neuromuscular. It's like their nerves communicate a little better with their muscles. You have these things called motor units. It's a motor neuron that innervates a certain number of muscle fibers. They begin to recruit in more synchronized patterns. Because they begin to recruit in more synchronized patterns, people get more coordinated, they get stronger. But over time, let's say first like 6 to 12 weeks is when they're going to be seeing that. Like after 12 weeks, we'll start to see maybe some muscular hypertrophy. You see a muscle getting a little bigger at the cellular level. But then you get to like tendinous adaptation. You're looking at like 6 months. I mean, that's a long time, when we start talking about like actual connective tissue strength and the ability to resist injury. Because a tendon ultimately is what's connecting your muscle to a bone. Like that's, it's not like it's getting a bunch of blood flow like your muscle is, so it just takes longer to adapt, and that's through the various stresses we put on it. And, we were talking earlier about the importance of moving a joint in all these different directions and learning to stress a joint. Your joint gets smart, right? It like learns that it can be stressed in different ways. So your connective tissue eventually adapts. Yeah. Wild 100%. Stuff.
If you do it enough, definitely. Yeah. I think there was Strange Grayson on Instagram had someone complain that like it's completely useless doing these isolation exercises, that these mobility training exercises don't do anything. You'd be just as you do just as well just doing any kind of training like pushing, pulling, lifting, and he was like, well, it's not that simple. I think this was a chiropractor that was actually pretty mad at him for calling him a charlatan or something. And I was like, well, that's pretty offensive considering it's not just one human being that follows this. There's a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of certifications out there, one of which is ours. You don't just get things certified by chance. There's a whole process that goes on through there. Like, there's a lot of science and a lot of institutions that have to check this stuff. It's not just mumbo jumbo. And then there's obviously the results, which is where people are usually getting into this stuff from injury. They've either had an accident or some kind of horrible injury, and they've found themselves in a lot of pain, struggling with movement. They go through this kind of mobility training techniques. After several months, they're like, whoa, I can actually do things again. And after maybe a year, they can do things they never could do before. And then there's someone saying, oh no, this is a waste of time. You'd be better off just doing normal training. Well, I can't possibly agree with that, because normal training wouldn't allow you to develop the skills of being able to do certain unique movements, but also actually resist injury. And it's not like a myth. It's not really, in my opinion, you can't say that you're injury resistant, or you're mitigating injury, and it's just like an opinion. It's not necessarily that simple. Like, I've been through many falls that have been dodgy as hell and nothing's happened, and I'm like, oh, that could be a coincidence, but it might not be. Like, I can't definitively say that, but I've been through, like, I think we were walking in France last year and I pretty much fell off a cliff.
Like, is that when you went on your ankle?
Yeah. And like, normally if I would go over on my ankle like that, I would definitely have an injury. Nothing happened. I was like, okay, well, that's great. I've heard many other people say things like that. I'm sure you've had some experiences where you're like, oh, I'm lucky that I trained that.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, and it's funny, as we're talking about this, I was actually thinking about Nicole, because, well, first of all, I don't even think we've really talked about like how all of us met in the first place.
Yeah.
Because you guys are on the opposite side of the world, but like, it's funny because when we first met, it was like, I believe it was Hali that DM'd me, and it was something, we were talking about mobility, right? Clearly we had like a very similar view on mobility stuff. I talked to you guys about getting on a video call with you. We got on a video call, we hit it off. We stayed in touch over the course of 4 years, and we finally got to meet you in person, like just a few months ago, so it's like, it's crazy. But within that, Nicole ties into all this as well, because it was, she was having like troubles with hip pain.
Yeah.
And it's like it was funny, I had like tried to help with it a couple times. And finally we had this conversation, and I was like, look, I think you just need to pay Hali and Calum it's like for some accountability and do this stuff. And she did exactly what you guys prescribed. And her hip pain was gone.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
it probably took about like 90 days, but I can let her talk about her experience. But anyway, I mean,
yeah. I have always been, well, not always been an active person, but I remembered during college, when I was going to school, I was working as a waitress. So I was getting like over 25,000 steps a day. And then I was in the gym at least once a day. So I was used to movement. And then after school, after leaving training in a gym environment, because I was a coach at the time I went to a desk job, and I remembered, I was like, wow, I am sitting for 8 hours a day. And it was such a shock to my body. And I remember seeing Hali doing all these crazy like things with her body. And it's not like, it is like, it's crazy. And Gabe and I talk about this a lot, like what is normal? Like most people probably look at what you guys can do with your bodies and you're like, wow, that's like so weird and like out there, but really, no, that's normal.
Yeah.
And I remember working with you guys, and I think it was, like within 3 months, I was like, wow, I have like full range. Like I was able to get my legs all the way to the floor, and it was absolutely incredible. And I actually wanted to ask you guys, because I know Hali said you said it takes about 7 months. So I am still in a desk job. And so a lot of people out there, especially here in the States, we have 9 to 5s, we sit in the desk all day. How long do you feel like per day someone should spend doing mobility exercises to overcome sitting all day in that flex position, if you have any input on that? And I know everyone's kind of different.
It's a good question. It depends.
I think that's kind of what we're trying to figure out, isn't it? Like, how do we?
Well, I think tissue type matters in this scenario.
Hypermobile people tend to fare worse with desk jobs.
Yeah. So like if I sit down, I actually, and I'm gonna butcher the word of this because I already use it or always use this word wrong. But just going to Scotland for 3 days, we were sitting down pretty much nonstop.
And that wiped her out so much more than me.
Yeah, I'm still recovering. But like, it was so cold. Like, I can't even, the wind was like 6 degrees.
I was in my natural
Celsius.
habitat. So
yes, you're
right.
fine. I wasn't. There's like this comical picture of me with like 5 different jackets on.
Oh, I saw that. It was so good.
And I was so cold, and I had a red nose, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, you actually feel cold to the touch." I was like, "I know, I'm dying." And I thought my body was just getting stiff, right? And I don't usually get that stiff. But oh my God, I couldn't straighten up. It was painful. And I think on the third day, I tore the muscles that run up my spine.
You couldn't train, could you?
No, the spinal erectors.
Yeah, like something up here.
Yeah. But I tore them so badly that Calum thought I was kidding. Like he was like, surely it's not that bad. I was like, no, it's that bad. Like I can't actually physically lift anything.
Yeah, we went to a gym in the hotel, and because it's funny, because she'd been doing nothing for like 3 days.
Just 3 days.
She couldn't train properly. She couldn't lift weights because her back was so painful.
Yeah. And all I try to do is, so I try to roll like my TFL and my quads, which usually feel nothing. This time it felt like a razor. I was like, 3 days. 3 days, this is the damage it's done. But I mean, obviously it's because it's cold as well.
Yeah.
It's like that combination of 3 days sitting in the cold, done some serious damage to my body. I mean, I'm fine now, but it's been like 10 days or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But he was fine.
Well,
he didn't have
I think
issues.
I was fine because I did just as, maybe not as much sitting as Hali, but a lot more sitting than I ever would, because you're at a wedding, you're sitting down, you're chatting to people. But there was a football kicking about, and all the time I'd be getting up and I'd be playing football with my cousins, my brother. We'd be kicking the ball around, so I was moving using my body, and then I was sitting down again and I was up and I was moving my body, and that probably is why I didn't get injured, didn't feel uncomfortable after like having so much time off training. I'm just going back to what Nicole was saying, is like, basically like with mobility training, is you're just trying to counteract your sport. It might be a sport that's repetitive, so you're trying to counteract, like tennis players using the same motions over and over again. Mobility training, you have to try and counteract it, do the opposite. And if you're at a desk job for like 8 hours a day doing not a lot, you have to try to counteract it with movement. And obviously you can't go to the gym and train for 8 hours, like that's impossible.
But you can also have movements and things that have more bang for your buck and over time.
No, you can do movement breaks, you can do like, go for walks, you can stand sometimes, you can sit in different positions, because it's not necessarily being still that's bad for you, it's being in one position, because that's what your body adapts to.
That's actually something I've noticed that I have to adapt. So Calum can sit down on the laptop for like 3-4 hours and he survives it. If I was to do that, like right now, I know I'm going to be stiff after this podcast. So I'm probably going to move around and look into getting a saddle chair ASAP. But one thing I'll do is I'll lie down in front of my laptop, like on my belly, or I'll move to the couch and I'll try to like take a quick walk down to the beach and back, which is just like 3 minutes. But I'm just going to try to like move a bit so that I don't stiffen up. And I notice a big difference with that versus a day where I'm glued to my laptop and I've maybe sat there for 8 hours and I can't get into a comfortable squat after that, or I can't deadlift or squat without my lower back aching. So there's a very significant difference between tissue types with that. And I don't think there's a specific amount of time, but I think every single human being has their own magical sort of formula, if that makes sense. I think you can't necessarily undo it with just training, but you can have like
it's a lifestyle change.
A lifestyle change. That makes a bigger difference.
Well, something I noticed with Nicole working from home is that like, she'll spend some time sitting down, she'll spend some time standing up. She got one of those, like, what is it, like a rock mat?
Oh yeah, I got the rock mat and toe spacers. So like at least once a day, I'll do it for like 20 minutes and I'll just stand on the rock mat.
Yeah, so good.
And that actually improves your blood pressure as well. So that's a really great way for your brain to stay a bit more active just by standing on something.
Yeah. And they also have like little bands, like I put around my legs just to try to get some movement to
really?
a little bit.
That's cool. That's clever.
But yeah, right now, so we live in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And how many days out of the year do you feel like it's rainy here?
It rains like 8 months out of the year. like at least.
Yeah.
So most days it is really difficult to go outside. I have a raincoat, but like if it's like pouring, like it's really hard to go out for quick little walk breaks. But we have a little bike, but right now it's sunny outside, so like I can go out in my garden, and I definitely feel my body feels so much better, and it's warmer. So my body definitely feels a lot better right now. And so
a lot of people do say the warmth makes a difference.
My mobility is better in Spain than it was in Poland or in Scotland. Like the cold, like my body reacts to it by, I don't know, maybe giving me less range of motion and movements. And it takes a lot longer to, it's a lot easier here where the temperature's high to just go outside, do a few stretches, do a morning mobility routine, do your daily cars. But when you're cold,
not so hard. Easy. Actually, I do remember in France, it got cold. We weren't supposed to live there that long. So we were supposed to be in France for 2 months. We ended up staying for 6 months, well into the winter season. And it must have been like a month or two where it was freezing. We were wearing many layers, hats and stuff just to go outside and train. And that's when things just started not working so well. Like my mobility was really being affected by it.
Yeah. Do you think the warmth is something, like I have a little bit of an exercise background, but do you think the warmth has something similar to like when you warm up for an exercise, like it's getting your like joints ready, your heart rate's increasing a little bit? Because I know I used to work with some patients a while back. If they couldn't do any stretching, like they just couldn't do a lot of movement, I would be like, sometimes if you take a warm shower afterwards, you can come out and that kind of helps loosen up your body a little bit.
Definitely.
So definitely similar?
I mean, it's supposed to be like just a few degrees of body temperature difference, and the guideline is to the observation of a mild sweat, but it's like
you walk out here and you've got a mild sweat just in the heat.
Exactly.
And the worst, probably the worst injury I've ever had, and I'm still dealing with it to this day, is from training outside in the cold.
Which Hali specifically told you.
Hali said, don't go out there.
Minus 20.
I think it was minus 20, like no word of a lie. This was like
in Warsaw.
Yeah, in like over kind of Christmas time in Warsaw, it was freezing.
And he had just warmed up inside, so he was a little sweaty.
Yeah, so we had the heating on in the house, got sweaty, warmed up, went outside, did pull-ups, and on my first set, like I never have a problem with mobility in a pull-up. Like I have the adequate mobility for a pull-up, never had an issue, but I went up, brought my chest to the bar, and it felt like something just like, I don't even know how to explain it because I've never had it before, but it was like something popped in my
I'm pretty sure it's got a herniated disc.
And I just felt it, and it was this excruciating pain. I jumped off and I literally couldn't move my neck like for a good while. And then even I was telling you, Gabe, when you guys were over, because one of the things that's helped so much is that tummy time, the adult tummy time, like being on the ground. It honestly, like it's really helped.
That's good.
Yeah, I try to spend as much time in that position as I can, and I'll even do my CARs, my controlled articular rotations, in that position, and that's been super helpful too.
That's awesome. I love hearing that.
Moral of the story: do not train in minus 20 while you've warmed up inside.
Don't train cold.
Yeah, that's really cold. I just looked at what it was in Fahrenheit, -4 degrees.
Yeah, that's
really
cool. Yeah, that's really
wow.
cool.
That's really cold.
Yeah,
I think the coldest I've ever been exposed to is 7 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was frigid. I thought I was gonna get frostbite.
Yeah, it was a kind of cold where your nostril hairs freeze up.
And
it was that kind of cold.
Yeah.
Like I was doing a set and coming in to the warmth, and then that's the other thing.
Calum was like, I can't wait to feel what it's like, and I'm like, it's not a fun feeling. It's pain. It's just pain.
Yeah.
If you're a coach or movement enthusiast that wants to take their mobility and strength training to the next level, complete with understanding joint functions and assessments, understanding the science behind mobility training, and understanding how to program and adapt things for specific clients, then this mobility certification is probably for you. When I was a new coach, I'd done several courses and certifications, things I really enjoyed but didn't necessarily understand how to use practically. Nothing quite prepared me for the injuries I sustained in my car accident, and this propelled me into several years of quite intense study and finding specific courses. Several years of study kind of turned into a decade of obsession, and once I became obsessed with mobility and strength training, other athletes started to find me, wanting me to help them with their mobility restrictions. I soon realized that absolutely everything I'd studied, I'd wished was in one place. Just one place where someone can take a course, understand all the science behind the assessments, the functions, how things progress scientifically, why we do things in a specific sequence. The amazing thing about this course being flexible learning and online means that everyone from all over the world who is using this course and has any questions can benefit from the private group that we've got on Facebook. We can cover new studies as and when they come out. And we can see how each person uses the course differently. Some people are martial artists, yoga teachers, CrossFit coaches, chiropractors, physios. Over time, we see footage come out of people using these methods in their gyms, in their movement practices, and with their clients. And it's really lovely to see how over time this method is starting to progress around the world.